Hello everyone and welcome. I often mention clubs suffering from poor management and I'm often asked, yes, but there are other examples. What are the teams that work well instead? Right away. It's unfortunately rarer in the world of football, but we have a few examples. I had mentioned Concarneau in the lower French divisions or the takeover of Dunkirk, which is perhaps in this case the best takeover that has happened in Europe for quite a while. And when we talk about the big teams, we obviously have Real Madrid, which operates in a very unique way. We have Manchester City. Despite the current crisis, as we mentioned, it is a club that is coherent, stable and well organized, unlike, for example, the clubs affiliated with the City Football Group. But there is a team that we have talked very little about in recent years, and that might be the most consistent sportingly, and this even extends in business terms. It is Liverpool. This video is not meant to say, you see, they work well, so they are first in the league in the Champions League. No, because the two are not necessarily correlated. Football is not an exact science. And Liverpool, like many others, has also made mistakes. Take, for example, the recruitment of Carvalho a few years ago, a young player from Fulham who just broke through. Well, he did not have the expected performance at all. He is no longer at the club, but it is not a mistake we will call intentional. Let me explain. There are two types of potential errors in football. You do your work and so on. You think it's the right solution, but in the end, well, it doesn't work for X or Y reason. Well, it's a mistake, but who doesn't make them? Everyone makes mistakes. And then there is the other type of error, what I would call the intentional error. That is to say, putting personal interests over those of the club. That is, I make a transfer not for the sporting value of the player, but for the value of my own bank account, because I will involve a friendly agent, I will take a kickback, and so on. Now in Liverpool, and I have interviewed many agents, we can't hear, yes, it's the in-house agents, etc. Just like it could have been in the club's past, we recall. So it doesn't prevent there from being some good deals at times, but overall, it is a club that really prioritizes the sport, and especially will truly work. With also this relationship between training and also regarding the shareholders' demands. Let me explain. Liverpool, financially speaking, is already doing quite well. We remember that 2 years ago, the owners, it's Fenway, the group, the American group that notably owns the Red Sox, had announced they were looking for new shareholders, that they were seeking new investors to help with Liverpool's capital. It caused quite a stir. And then if you look closely at Liverpool's finances, it wasn't that bad. I temper it because last year they lost quite a bit of money, they reinforced their squad, they were not in the Champions League. But if we look at the previous years overall, it balanced out. 2022, 2023, they lost about 10 million, which is not that huge. And because the year before, so 2021, 2022, if I'm not mistaken, they had a profit of almost 10 million. So actually they are quite balanced. Obviously it's a club with debt, but since all the large football structures, but also of course assets. But in fact, they gradually and incrementally exploded their commercial revenue to reach record levels. Their wage bill is lower relative to the club's total revenue, meaning the wage bill represents about 50% of the turnover. It is between 55 and 60%, I believe, of the budget and income of the club. So it is less than many Premier League teams, so they can still improve it a little. And now we know there are contract renegotiations, so we'll see what happens. But overall, the budget, it is everything. They are increasingly internationalized, reasonable on transfers, able to make some sales. Honestly, Liverpool, in terms of business, is very good. And this even though the shareholders had put a stop by saying, okay, we are looking for other people to help us. Except that at one point when they saw this, remember 2021, 2022, is almost the peak. And yet you might say they win the Cup and the League Cup, but they finish 1 point behind Manchester City with 92 points. So in all other years, they would have been champions and they play this unfortunate final against Real, who win the Champions League. So you are dethroned by Madrid and City, who have magnificent seasons. But I mean, that year of Liverpool is incredible. It might leave a disappointment because they came so close to a quadruple. And so afterwards, naturally, there were departures. There were, let's say, not a bit of the end of a cycle. So they finished fifth the year after. It was complicated. Last year, they finished third, and last year, 4 players arrived. So there, they reinforced more than usual. It never was that way. We have Gravenberch who arrived. We also have Endo, if I'm not mistaken, on the bench. Szoboszlai, well then, indeed, 70 million, a Hungarian from Germany. They triggered the clause, which is quite rare for Liverpool. There is a fourth player whose name I forgot. Overall, it was much more strengthened in order to form this new block. Except why am I explaining that it's coherent, Liverpool? There are not many changes in the organizational structure. For many years, the club was managed sportingly by Michael Edwards, but he left in 2022. And now he has just returned, and it is somewhat under his orders and advice that a Scot named Richard Hughes was appointed as the sporting director, who is a former midfielder who notably played at Portsmouth. At the same time, the shareholders are very calm. They let people work. You have Klopp, who has stayed as long as he chose his successor. Slot, it really took. And in fact, we realized that first, he did not leave a field of ruins, even though we know that often, when such an emblematic manager stays for so long, for the one who arrives sometimes, it's a bit complicated, because we are prepared precisely at Liverpool, I'm not allowed to say it, the renewal of a squad Always keep in soldiers, experienced guys, the Van Dijk, the Salah, you could even say a Robertson, a bit younger, but who has been there for a long time, a Joe Gomez, an Alisson or what have you. But we had started preparing by compensating the squad's needs, and that's what has been Liverpool's strength with Klopp, who brought the Reds back to a very consistent level on the scene. National and still continental, because they still won a Champions, won the Premier League, they also won a lot of cups, including the League Cup, FA Cup. No nonsense, a Community Shield, finally, those kinds of rewards too. And then especially, actually, they cultivated this squad. Why do I think it's interesting? It's that this summer, well, they are not very active in the transfer market because in fact they don't need to be, because they have been acquiring for years and years players, especially those who played in Germany. You can think of Konate, you can think of Gravenberch, who were actually complementary and matched their needs. And McAllister, he was the fourth player they bought last summer, who came from Brighton. 45 million, they bought him in his second season. It's not that expensive either. It's well thought out because it gives you legs, it brings you something else. And so, in fact, all these intermediate age players, they're starting to grow. So Konate at the back, when you see him with Van Dijk, we chose a very good profile. In midfield, Gravenberch, you needed a number 6. You really missed that, especially since Fabinho's departure hadn't really been compensated for. You have McAllister who runs a lot, etc. At the same time, you have a young player from your training, Jones, who brings you a bit more speed. And then on the bench, you have rotations. You have Endo, a guy with an impeccable mindset. Whether he plays or not, he's an excellent substitute. Then you are making a bet on Szoboszlai, a very technical Hungarian who brings something you didn't really have. 2 years ago, who did you bring in? You brought in Darwin Núñez. You also see the potential, the mentality. Gago, similarly, a player with a different profile. And it obviously reminds you of the signings that had happened before with Luis Diaz, or the Jotas and many others. So in fact, it's smart because behind this you also have your training, and above all, Liverpool is a training club. It's the DNA of the Reds, and it's respected, because obviously we are going to talk to you about Jones, who is, still a 12th man, often a starter, etc., who comes from the club, but he's not the only one. Trent Arnold, of course, on the right side, but behind Trent Arnold, when he's injured, who do you have? You have Conor Bradley, who's a Northern Irishman they went to get at 16, 17 years old, a Duncan Swift. So certainly Dungannon is a club somewhat known for its training in Northern Ireland, but it's not a Belfast team, so he was scouted in the same way as the Irish goalkeeper Kelleher. They went to get him, I believe, at 15 or 16 years old, also in Ireland. And the same goes for Ben Doak, a Scot they picked up at 16 years old from Celtic, certainly, a little Scottish marvel who became an international winger. He is currently on loan to Middlesbrough. It also recalls Liverpool's Scottish tradition, like Hansen, Sones, Dalglish back in the day, or Robertson today. We see that they are still leading in Scotland. A few years ago, they picked up Kieran Galasha, a left back from Falkirk, whom I once saw on New Year's Day in Dunfermline. Ultimately, he will not have the expected career, like Calvin Ramsey, the right back they got from Aberdeen. I was a bit more surprised when they got him. But you see that they have picked up all these, let's say, British players. It reminds you of Joe Gomez at the time, who came from Charlton, but he also didn't have a lot of experience. They picked him up, and in fact, these are people who are going to stay for a long time. If you add in Harvey Elliott, well, he was at Queen's Park Rangers, I believe, at 17 or 18 years old when they got him. You have your academy working well, because you are able to produce players, I would say, of a certain mold. Either guys with enormous quality like Trent Arnold, but also team players. We can think of Jaws. I believe they have a goalkeeper named Davis, who was loaned to Crewe Alexandra, which is not far from Liverpool. There must be 2 or 3 guys, I lost track of the names a bit, who sometimes sit on the bench, etc. It allows you to develop a club culture, a club spirit, with also guys who have been there for a long time. Let's say your pillars and others, your soldiers. Endo, he's a soldier. He's a guy on the bench, he's always there, he's going to come in. Boom. A McAllister soldier, Robertson soldier, and alongside that, obviously, you have guys with that talent, like Diaz, who is capable of igniting a match. Obviously the leaders, Van Dijk or Salah. And on top of that, and this is why Liverpool is really well managed anyway, I believe that Van Dijk, Salah, Matsimov, Sub, and Arnaud, 30 without end after all. I'm not talking nonsense. Now they're starting the talks, but they had waited because they also know very well when to part with certain players. Remember Sadio Mane, remember Wijnaldum. They don't make offers, the PSG says great and so on. We've seen what it led to. So a clever club that managed to reinvent itself, especially after that famous cycle, because imagine how hard it was, saying you were so close to achieving a historic quadruple. And for really not much, you lose both the Premier League and the Champions League. Yes, you win the FA Cup and the League Cup, but it's not at all comparable. The following year, well, you are just an A4. You finished 5th, and last year you got 3rd place. Claude, who finishes that? It is also true. All the egos to manage. It might not have been very easy, but now we feel there was a need to change the coach. They take Slot, it works really well. They do not need to massively overhaul their squad. And when you hear the recruiters, I surveyed them, they tell you, but wait, the worst part is there is a generation coming up behind, very young, which is extremely valued. So that means you have a club that has secured its future, which at the same time is improving its commercial revenue and has a wage bill that, unlike others, remains relatively measured. manager and is still in a position of strength regarding contract extensions. Because Trent Arnold, you don't need to break the bank either. Of course, you would like him to stay. We know Real is pushing hard, but behind him you have Bradley. That is, they have already potentially anticipated a departure, and regarding that, now they are thinking because they don't want to, not offering perhaps too long a contract. So now they are looking into it, and in any case, you feel the club is calm. So it's true, yes, we noticed that he had spoken directly to Jean-Yves. It's him who insisted on speaking to Jean-Yves after a match to talk about his situation and everything. Because indeed, the fans obviously want to see the Egyptian king again, we can well imagine. But we have a club that is not panicking, but especially one that has sportingly brought back a Michael Edwards. We have a Richard Hughes, we have other people, but we especially have plenty of scouts working in pre-training who are going to travel across the United Kingdom. That is something, for example, that the big clubs do a little less. And we notice that at Liverpool, well, often they will pick up a guy from Wales, they will pick up a guy from Scotland, a guy from Northern Ireland, sometimes also from Ireland. And in fact, they are the ones who will do this because it's a tradition. So it's this connection between the DNA, the club, modernity. It does not prevent certain mistakes. For example, the Brazilian goalkeeper they got a few years ago, who is loaned to Livingston in the Scottish second division. I love Scotland. You know, for example, with the transfer, I'm curious to see. But when you talk to plenty of agents, they say, yeah, sometimes you get a little something, but not much. Here, they're doing Chiesa this summer. So yes, they needed Ramadani, whatever you want. It's a market opportunity in a way. I mean, the bank for now, we'll see what it may lead to in the long term. But it's not shocking. When you look at the prices paid, it's not very shocking either. I mean, Mac Allister, they expect 45 or 50 for a guy who's already in the Premier League, who was a world champion. When you see the price of Enzo Fernandez alongside, everything Chelsea paid, you generally think. Liverpool? It's clever. Sometimes they might do some small splurges, but these splurges are well thought out because they are worked on in advance. So it doesn't prevent mistakes, obviously, and I will learn things where I'll tell myself, there's some funny business here, some funny business there. It's the football world. But when you look on a global scale over all these years, I just have to say to all the other clubs, take a cue from Liverpool because they have realized that they put football at the center. They brought in people they knew who stayed in their place. There is a hierarchy, there is an organization, and then behind it all, they combined everything with the club's DNA, which also incorporates modernity. So in conclusion, well done, Faith team.